March 24th and 25th, 2 days. And what they are carrying in their wake is not a gentle turning, it is a reckoning. Friday the 13th has passed, the eclipse has moved through, and the question that has been sitting at the center of everything, the one you have been circling without quite looking at directly, is now unavoidable. You feel it in your body before you find the words for it. A kind of clarity that does not feel like comfort, a stillness that does not feel like rest. Something has been stripped away, and what is left is more honest than you were prepared for. You have been here before in smaller versions of this. The moment after something ends, when the noise stops, and you are left standing in the quiet with a truth you can no longer postpone. That is the quality of these days, not catastrophe, not collapse. Something more precise than either of those. The kind of clarity that comes after a long fever breaks, when you are weak and stripped and somehow underneath all of that, more real than you have been in years. If you have been waking up between 2 and 4 in the morning, lying in the dark with a thought that will not resolve, you are not broken. If you have been moving through your days with the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical tiredness, but from carrying something heavy that has no name yet, that is not a sign that something is wrong with you. If you have found yourself looking at familiar things, your home, your relationships, the shape of your days, and seeing them differently than you saw them 3 weeks ago, as if a lens has shifted slightly and the angle is new and the view is truer but harder, that is not a malfunction. That is the aftermath of what has moved through the sky, settling into the marrow of your actual life. These days are not the storm. The storm has already passed. These days are the morning after, the floor of the sea exposed, and the morning after is its own kind of work. If you are watching this now, drop a comment before you go anywhere else. Type the words, "I am still here." Because that is what these days are asking. Not transformation for its own sake, just the simple, heavy, honest acknowledgement that you are present inside this moment, even when presence is the harder thing. There are thousands of people watching this in the same window of hours. People who woke up this morning with the same unnameable weight in their chest. People sitting with the same uneasy clarity, wondering what to do with what they now see. You are not alone in this. Please do not rush past it. Subscribe if you have not already. This channel exists to meet you in the real places, not the comfortable ones. Leave that comment, and then stay, because what comes next is the part you have been needing someone to say out loud. Let us go deeper. The first thing you need to know is that what you have been feeling is not vague. It is not anxiety in the generic sense, the word we use when we want to acknowledge that something is wrong without having to be precise about what. What you have been feeling has a specific texture, and if I can name it precisely enough, you will recognize it not as something foreign happening to you, but as something that has been living in you for longer than these past few weeks. Something that the recent sky has simply brought to the surface where it can finally be seen. Your sleep has changed, not dramatically in most cases, but in the particular way that signals an interior shift is underway. You fall asleep normally, or perhaps a little later than usual, because your mind will not quiet. And then at some point in the deep part of the night, usually between 2 and 4, you find yourself awake. Not anxious in a racing way, still. Alert in a way that feels purposeful, as if something inside you has woken you deliberately. The room is dark and quiet, and your mind is unusually clear, and the clarity is not peaceful. It is surgical. It finds the exact thing you have been not looking at and illuminates it without mercy. You lie there, the whole house quiet around you, and the thought sits in the center of the room of your mind, like a piece of furniture that has always been there, but that you have been stepping around carefully, and in the dark clarity of 3 a.m., you can finally see its actual shape. You have been thinking about the shape of your life, not in the motivational sense, not in the set your goals and manifest your future sense, but in the more honest and more difficult sense of looking at the structure of the days you actually live and asking whether they are true. Whether the way you spend your hours reflects what you actually value, whether the commitments you carry are ones you chose consciously, or ones you fell into and have been maintaining out of inertia, out of loyalty to a version of yourself that may no longer be accurate, out of the fear that changing them would mean admitting something about the past that is painful to admit. This thought does not arrive with urgency, with panic, with the pressure of crisis. It arrives with the quiet and the weight of something that has always been true and is no longer willing to be deferred. And then there is the exhaustion. This is different from being tired. Tired is resolved by sleep. What you have been carrying is more specific than tired. It is the particular depletion that comes from maintaining a version of yourself that requires more energy than it used to. Not dishonest exactly, not false, but perhaps, and this is the word that has been forming in the back of your mind without quite arriving at the surface, perhaps outgrown. You have been wearing a self that was built for conditions that no longer fully exist, and the effort of maintaining it, of walking through your days as that particular person, has been slowly, quietly, without drama, exhausting you. The exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of honesty. Your body is telling you what your mind has been rationalizing around. You have noticed things about your relationships, not crises, not ruptures, but smaller and more truthful things. Conversations that used to feel easy now require more effort, not because the other person has changed, but because you have, slightly. Enough. The patterns of interaction that kept both parties comfortable without asking too much of either are not working the way they used to. You notice the performance in them. You notice the places where genuine contact is not being made. There is a moment in some of your interactions lately, a pause, a split second, where you can feel yourself choosing the familiar response over the honest one, and the choosing takes a fraction more effort than it used to. That fraction is information. There has been a grief running underneath all of this. Not sharp, not new, old grief. The kind that comes from a life that has moved through losses that were absorbed and then, because there was always something next, always something that needed attending to, set aside rather than fully felt. The eclipse season, the transits of these weeks, the particular pressure in the sky right now, all of it acts like a warming of old sediment. Things that settled long ago are beginning to stir, not because they were unfinished in a dramatic way, because they were real. Because grief does not actually disappear when you move past it. It compresses and waits and finds its moments. This is one of its moments. The grief that has been surfacing lately may not have a specific object. It may simply be the grief of time, of the years behind you, of the paths not taken, of the versions of yourself and your life that were real and are now gone, and that deserve, quietly, to be acknowledged as losses rather than simply milestones. And there is something else, something harder to name, a kind of longing that is not quite loneliness and not quite desire, but has elements of both. A longing for a version of your life that feels like it actually belongs to you, not built primarily around what others needed from you, not constructed as a response to circumstances, but genuinely, recognizably yours. For a lot of people in their 50s, that longing is among the most honest things happening inside them. And it is also among the most suppressed, because wanting your own life, or in really wanting it, in a way that might require things to change, can feel, to people who have spent decades being responsible and present for others, dangerously close to selfishness. It is not selfish, but we will come back to that. All of these experiences, the interrupted sleep, the recurring questions, the relational friction, the old grief rising, the longing for something more genuinely your own, they are not separate problems requiring separate solutions. They are all the same message arriving through different doors. They are the aftermath of what has been moving through the sky. And now, let me tell you what that is. Here is what has been building. We have just moved through an eclipse corridor, the kind of compressed astrological passage that does not announce its full significance until you are on the other side of it and can turn around and see what it rearranged. The solar eclipse that arrived earlier in March was exact at a degree that pressed directly on the structures of identity, who you have been performing yourself to be, and whether that performance still fits the person who is actually living your life. Solar eclipses at this degree do not deliver revelations in the cinematic sense, a sudden flash of light, a clear new path. They work more like a slow drainage. They quietly remove the things that have been propping up a version of you that was never fully solid, and when enough of the scaffolding is gone, you find yourself in a space that is emptier than you expected. Not empty as in lacking, empty as in cleared. Think of the tide going out. Not just the surface water receding at the shoreline, but the whole long pull, the deep gravitational withdrawal that only happens when the celestial configuration is exactly right. What it reveals is the floor of the sea, the rocks, the formations, the quiet life that has been there all along, hidden by the normal water level. You have swum in that water your whole life. You have navigated its surface currents, managed its moods, understood it in the way you understand a place you have lived in for decades. But the floor, the actual ground of your interior life, has not been this visible in years. What the eclipse did, and what the days on either side of it are still doing, is lower the water level far enough that you can finally see what has always been underneath. Mars, which has been moving through a tense and activating position in recent weeks, is now adding its particular pressure to this already exposed terrain. Mars in this configuration does not produce aggression in the traditional sense. It produces impatience. A deep cellular impatience with delay, with deferral, with the familiar process of deciding that now is not quite the right moment, that the circumstances are not yet perfect. Mars right now is the part of you that has run out of patience with postponement. The part that, when it encounters yet another version of not yet, does not become aggressive. It becomes tired. Quietly, profoundly tired of the distance between what you know and what you are actually doing about what you know. That tiredness is not a character flaw. It is an accurate response to a gap that has been widening for long enough. Saturn is providing the structural context for all of this, and Saturn's role here is not to punish. It is to insist. Saturn insists on reality. It removes the comfortable fictions we use to avoid facing what is true. Under Saturn's current influence, the things that have been held together primarily by wishful thinking are becoming visible as exactly that. Not solid foundations, but wishes dressed as plans. Not genuine connections, but familiarity dressed as intimacy. Not fulfilling commitments, but tolerable ones that were never consciously evaluated. Saturn does not do this cruelly. It does it the way a very honest friend does it, without cruelty, without comfort, with the particular directness of someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable to hear. And then there is Neptune, which has recently completed a major transit of decades and is now in new territory. This shift is slower, more diffuse, more like a change in the quality of the light than a change in the specific objects illuminated. What Neptune's new position is doing is dissolving, gently, persistently, without particular drama, the illusions built in the dream space of the past decades. The stories we told ourselves about how things were going to go. The idealized versions of our relationships, our careers, ourselves. Neptune's dissolution is not cruel, it is honest. It shows you what was always true underneath the story you were telling about it. And when the story goes, what is left is sometimes less than you hoped for, and almost always more real than what the story was covering. The 6 truths these days are forcing you to face are not coming from outside you. They are not being handed down by some celestial authority. They are truths you have always known, at some level living in your body, in your recurring thoughts, in the things you choose not to look at directly. What the sky is doing right now is simply making the avoidance of those truths more costly than the facing of them. That is the moment you are in, the low tide, the exposed floor, the morning after, and it is time to look directly at what is there. The first truth is about what you have outgrown. There is a difference between something ending because it failed and something ending because it was completed. Our culture has very little language for the second category. We are comfortable with endings that arrive because something went wrong, the relationship that broke down, the career that did not work out, the path that led nowhere. Those endings come with built-in narrative. They fit the story of trying and failing, which at least gives us something to learn from, someone to forgive, a reason we can point to. But there is another kind of ending that is far more disorienting because it arrives not from failure, but from fullness. Something served you, genuinely and well and for a long time. It was right for a version of you that lived inside a particular set of circumstances, carried a particular set of needs, understood themselves in a particular way, and that version of you, and you need to hear this clearly, did not fail, did not make a mistake, made the only choices that were available to them given who they were and what they knew. And now you are different. And the thing that fit them does not fit you in the same way anymore. The part that makes this hard is the loyalty. People in their 50s and beyond understand loyalty in a way that younger people are still learning. They have been loyal to jobs, to relationships, to versions of themselves, to commitments made in circumstances that no longer exist, and they have done it not out of stupidity, but out of genuine values. Loyalty matters. Continuity matters. The person who honors their commitments even when honoring them is costly as not a fool. They are someone who understands that the quality of a life is partly measured by the quality of the way a person keeps their word. This is true. And loyalty to an outdated version of your life is not virtue. It is something closer to a refusal to honor how much you have actually grown. And that refusal is expensive. It costs you the energy of maintaining something that no longer fits. It costs you the version of your life that would be available if you stopped spending that energy on maintenance and redirected it toward becoming. You know what you have outgrown. The particular truth the low tide is exposing in this area of your life is not news to you. It has been partially visible for months, possibly longer. What is changing in these days is the cost of the partial seeing. It is becoming harder to hold a half-acknowledged truth at arm's length. The eclipse stripped some of the comfortable ambiguity. What remains is clearer, and the clarity is asking you to stop performing the not knowing. The second truth is about the difference between peace and avoidance. There is a kind of calm that comes from having successfully organized your life so that the most challenging things are never quite directly in front of you. It looks like stability from the outside. It functions as stability for a time. You have routines, commitments, the forward motion of ordinary days. And as long as that motion continues, the things that have not been looked at remain slightly to the side of your direct vision. Peripheral, present but manageable. The rhythm of the days carries you past the places where the discomfort would be unavoidable if you stood still. And so you keep moving, and you call the movement peace. This is not peace. This is a very sophisticated form of avoidance, and the cost of it is a low-grade flatness that most people register as normal, but that is actually the suppression of aliveness. Peace is different. Peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of honesty. It is the quality of interior life that arrives when you are in right relationship with what is actually true about your life, even when what is true is hard, even when what is true is not yet resolved, even when what is true asks something of you that you are not certain you are ready to give. Peace does not require your circumstances to be comfortable. It requires you to be honest about your circumstances. The distinction is not a small one. The low tide metaphor applies here with particular force. When the water is at its normal level, the floor of the sea is hidden. The ecosystem continues, the surface activity continues. You are swimming, but you are swimming in the surface layer, which is comfortable and familiar and does not require you to go down. When the tide lowers, the floor is exposed, and what you find there is not danger, it is information. Information that the surface-level life has been sitting on top of without ever fully incorporating. The question this truth is asking is not whether you are willing to feel discomfort. Most people at this stage of life have faced enough genuine difficulty to know they can tolerate discomfort. The question is whether you are willing to stop organizing your days around the avoidance of specific truths that have outgrown their ability to be avoided. The third truth is about the people in your life who are in relationship with a version of you that no longer fully exists. This one is delicate, and it requires extraordinary care, because it is very easy to hear it as an accusation, and it is not. The people in your life, then, the ones you love, the ones you are committed to, the ones whose well-being has been woven into the center of how you understand yourself, are not doing anything wrong. They are in relationship with the person you have been presenting yourself as, and for a long time, that person and the person you actually are have been close enough to the same that the difference did not matter much. But somewhere in the past few years, the gap between those two versions has been quietly widening. The person they know, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who handles things, the one who does not ask for much, is real. It is also partial. And the parts of you that have been suppressed in order to be consistently that person are beginning to push through the surface in ways that are costing you more to suppress than they used to. The truth being forced here is not that you need to blow up your relationships or suddenly become someone your people cannot recognize. It is something more subtle and more demanding. You need to begin letting yourself be more fully seen by the people who claim to love you. This feels frightening because the fuller version of you, the one with needs, with uncertainties, with things you have not yet figured out, with a longing for your own life that does not always put others first, is a version you were taught, in ways both explicit and implicit, to protect others from. You learned early, most likely, that your complexity was a burden, that the right way to be loved was to be manageable, consistent, low maintenance. What the sky is making unavoidable right now is the cost of that lesson. The cost in intimacy, the cost in aliveness, the cost in the kind of connection that can only happen between two fully present people, neither of whom is performing for the other's comfort. The fourth truth is about a decision you have been postponing. You know what it is. I'm not going to try to name it specifically, because it is different for everyone watching this, and any specific example I chose would be someone else's truth, not yours. But you know. There is something, a direction, a change, a conversation, an ending, a beginning, a choice that has been sitting in your awareness for long enough that you have developed an entire internal architecture around not making it. Reasons why now is not the right time. Practical considerations that are real, but that have been subtly promoted in importance beyond their actual weight. The people it would affect, whose potential responses have been quietly growing into obstacles in the story you have been telling yourself. The uncertainty of what comes after. The fear, possibly, that you have waited so long that the window may have closed, and that the waiting itself is now part of what would need to be faced if you stopped waiting. Here is what the current sky is showing you. The cost of not making this decision is no longer stable. It has been rising steadily, like compound interest accruing on a debt you keep not looking at. The clarity of these days is showing you that number, the accumulated total of the weight, with a precision that is no longer comfortable to look away from. The postponement has not been cowardice. Let that go. It has been the absolutely understandable response of someone who has real responsibilities, real relationships, real stakes, and a genuine understanding of how much disruption a significant choice can create. But what is becoming clear, in the specific low-tide quality of these days, is that the version of the postponement that was wisdom is beginning to tip into the version that is simply delay. And you can feel that tipping. That is part of what is keeping you awake. The fifth truth is about the body you have been living in, as if it were a problem to be managed rather than a home to be inhabited. For many people in their 50s, the body has become primarily a site of concern, a thing to be monitored, maintained, improved, or worried about. The conversation you have with your body is often a conversation about what it is doing wrong, what it needs to be doing differently, what it used to be able to do that it can no longer do, what medications or practices or disciplines are required to keep it functional. This is, of course, not without reason. The body at 50 is different from the body at 30, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of avoidance. But what has been lost in the management conversation is something the current transits are specifically pressing to restore. The simple experience of inhabiting your body with presence rather than supervision. Your body has been carrying everything that your mind has been deferring. The unresolved emotions do not disappear because you have organized your days around not feeling them. They localize. In the jaw, held tight against words not spoken. In the shoulders, braced against responsibility carried without complaint. In the stomach, where the anxiety lives, that the mind has successfully rationalized away. In the chest, where the grief sits, compressed and waiting. The tension in your body is not a malfunction. It is a record, your body keeping with extraordinary fidelity the account of everything that has been felt but not expressed, known but not acknowledged, true but not faced. When you place your attention on those places of holding, slowly without agenda, what often arises is not pain. It is information. The same information that the low tide is revealing in every other area of your life. The sixth truth is the most important one and the hardest, and the one most likely to be resisted by exactly the people for whom it is most true. You have permission to want what you want. That is it. That is the sixth truth. It does not look complicated written down. It does not land as complicated when it is said simply. But for a significant number of people watching this, people who have spent the larger part of their adult lives in service to others, people who were taught that wanting things for themselves was a luxury or an imposition or a form of selfishness, people who have become so expert at subordinating their own desires to the needs of others that they have partially lost contact with what they even want. This is the most radical and the most frightening thing that could be said. You have permission to want what you want, not as a reward for having been good enough or selfless enough or responsible enough for long enough, not as a transaction, not as something you have earned through sufficient self-sacrifice, simply because you are here, because you are alive, because wanting things, a life that feels genuinely yours, relationships that see you fully, work that matters to you, experiences that bring you fully alive, is not selfishness. It is the basic condition of being a human being who has not been fully extinguished by the accumulated weight of accommodation. The eclipse season and the transits of these days are specifically targeting the structures that were built around the suppression of this wanting, not to burn them down, not to create chaos, but to make the suppression visible as suppression, to show you, in the clear, low-tide light of right now, what it has been costing you. Now let us stay in this territory for a while, because the truths deserve more than naming. They deserve the space it takes to actually feel them land. You are between two versions of yourself. This needs to be said with the care it deserves. The particular between you are in right now was not created by these days. The seeds of it were planted years ago. What the eclipse did was make it undeniable. What March 24th and 25th are doing is confirming that the between is real, that you are genuinely in it, that there is no returning to the shore you left without a degree of dishonesty that you are no longer willing to pay for. The version of you that knew how to live inside the structures that are now dissolving, that person was not wrong. Let me say that again because it matters. They were not wrong. They were not broken. They did not make avoidable mistakes. They built the life they built from the materials that were available, with the knowledge they had, in the conditions they were in. They loved with what they knew of love. They made decisions with what they knew of wisdom. They were doing at every point approximately the best they could do given who they were in that moment. Honor that person. You are that person. They are not being discarded. They are being included inside something larger. The work of the between is not to dismantle the past, but to enlarge your relationship to it, to hold it honestly, including the losses and the wrong turns, without allowing it to set the ceiling on who you can be now. But you are also not fully that person anymore. Something has shifted. Not all the way. You are not on the other side of this yet, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. You are in the between, and the between is the territory of real transformation. Real transformation is nothing like the cinematic version. It is not a moment of clarity, after which everything becomes simple. It is not the before and after photograph in which the person is recognizably the same, but visibly improved. It is this, the persistent, unglamorous daily work of continuing to show up for a truth you have only partially arrived at, in a life whose structure has not yet fully reorganized around that truth. It is confusing. It is tiring. It is sometimes lonely in a very specific way, the loneliness of being somewhere new that has not yet been mapped, without a companion who has been there before, speaking a language for your own experience that you are still in the process of learning. The between is where the breaking open lives, and breaking open is not breaking down. This distinction matters enormously, especially for people in their 50s who have watched things break down and know what it costs. Breaking open is the process by which something becomes more rather than less. The shell of a seed breaking is not the death of the seed. It is the beginning of the part of the seed that was always waiting to be the plant. What is breaking open in you right now is not the core of you. It is the protective covering that was necessary for a time and is now being shed because the conditions have changed enough that what was inside is ready for a different kind of light. What rises when the shell breaks is not always comfortable to meet. For many people in these days, what is surfacing is old, not new insights, but ancient recognitions. Things they have always known about themselves and their lives that were submerged beneath the necessary business of living. Old grief, old desires. The version of themselves that existed before the long period of accommodation began, before the self was systematically made smaller to fit the available space. That version is not gone. It has been compressed, folded, patient, and the low tide is letting it rise. The long pattern, the one this transit is specifically illuminating, is the pattern of self-erasure in service of connection. The learned behavior, probably beginning very early in life, of making yourself less in order to make others more comfortable, less demanding, less complicated, less honestly yourself. This pattern runs in families. It was modeled for you by people who believed, genuinely because they had been taught, that this was love. That love meant disappearing yourself into the needs of others, that a good person did not take up too much space, that asking for what you needed was an imposition. This pattern has served you in specific ways. It has produced relationships in which you are genuinely needed and valued, a reputation for reliability and strength that carries its own satisfactions. The pattern has not been without its gifts, and the gifts have been purchased at a cost that the low tide is now making it very difficult to look away from. The cost of the ongoing, daily, accumulated effort of being less than you are. The cost in the quality of your most intimate relationships, where the person being loved is a partial version of you, and where the love, real as it is therefore landing on a surface rather than a depth. The cost in the disconnect between the life you are living and the life that in the 3 a.m. clarity you can feel is possible. Not distant, not fantastical, close. The identity in between, the person you are right now in these days, having had enough of the scaffolding removed to see more clearly and not yet having built the new structure. That person needs something specific, not advice, not direction, not the reassurance that everything is going to be fine, which is both unknowable and, in this moment, beside the point. What that person needs is simply to be acknowledged in the specific reality of where they are, to be seen without being fixed, to be told, you are not lost, you are between. These are not the same thing. Lost means you do not know where you are. Between means you know exactly where you are in the passage, and the passage is real and it is not comfortable, and it is also underneath the discomfort, exactly where you need to be. Something is beginning to stabilize underneath the dissolution. You may not feel it clearly yet, but it is there. Something becoming more solid beneath the liquefaction of the old certainties. Not new answers, not a plan, a quality of presence that is new. A steadiness that is different in character from the old steadiness that came from certainty, and the forward momentum of knowing what you were supposed to be doing. This new steadiness is quieter. It does not announce itself. It arrives in small moments. A decision that felt impossible last month feeling possible now. A relationship seen more clearly without the protective blur of wishful thinking. And the clarity, though it includes some loss, also includes a kind of relief. A direction beginning to be perceptible. Not a destination, not a specific future you can describe, but a direction, a quality of movement, the faint early sense of which way is north. The low tide does not stay low indefinitely. The water comes back, the floor covers over, the ordinary life of the surface resumes. What matters, what has always mattered in these specific windows of low tide clarity, is what you do with the time you have while the ground is visible. Whether you walk out onto that floor and really look, whether you let what you find there register in the deep place where real change actually takes root, whether you carry something back when the water returns, not a souvenir, not a symbol, but an actual lived recognition that will continue to inform your choices long after the dramatic clarity of these days has softened back into the texture of ordinary life. 3 things. 3 specific, grounded, honest practices for these exact days. Not generic, not the kind of thing you could find in any spiritual self-help context. These are designed for the specific energetic terrain of the morning after, the low-tide clarity of March 24th and 25th. The first is honest inventory, not journaling in the way the word is usually used, not writing about your feelings in a stream of consciousness way, not processing emotions through narrative. This is something more specific. You are going to write down, not in your head, on paper or in a document where you have to look at the words and they cannot simply be thought away, the 6 things you know. Not the 6 things you feel. Not the 6 things you are worried about. The 6 things you know. The truths that have been surfacing in these days that you have been circling around without quite writing down. The thing about the relationship you have been half not seeing. The decision you have been postponing. The structure of your days that no longer fits. The version of yourself you have outgrown. The desire you have been suppressing. The conversation you have been not having. Write them down. 1 sentence each. As plainly as possible. Without interpretation, without strategy, without wondering what to do about them. Just the 6 true things, in the clear language of honest acknowledgement. The resistance that will arise is the fear that writing them down makes them more real. That if they are on the page, they require action, require you to respond differently than you have been responding, and you are not ready, or you think you are not ready, to do whatever that responding will require. Here is what is actually true. The things you know do not become more real by being written down. They are already as real as they are going to be. What changes when you write them down is your relationship to them. You stop spending the energy of avoidance. You stop organizing your days around not looking at them directly. You let them exist in the open, acknowledged, and then you give yourself the dignity of being a person who knows what is true about their own life. The second practice is deliberate stillness. Not meditation in the prescribed sense, not a technique, not a protocol, not something that requires instruction or a specific posture or a particular length of time that feels like a commitment you might not keep. This is simpler than that, and in some ways harder. You are going to spend 15 minutes a day, preferably in the early morning or the late evening when the day's noise has subsided, doing nothing, not listening to anything, not reading anything, not processing anything through your phone or your television or any other stream of incoming content, simply sitting still with yourself and whatever arises. The specific reason this matters for these exact days is that the transits active right now are producing information, real important, personally significant information about your life. And that information arrives in the register of the body and the deeper mind, not in the register of surface thought. The surface mind is busy. It is solving problems, managing schedules, navigating obligations, protecting you from the things it has decided are too much to look at right now. The information that is trying to reach you is trying to come through the quiet, and the quiet is exactly what most of us have been chronically denying ourselves. The resistance here will be boredom first, then discomfort, then the very compelling feeling that there are more productive things you could be doing with 15 minutes. All of this is the surface mind protecting you from the deeper information. Sit with it anyway. The information is worth the discomfort. The third practice is 1 honest conversation. 1. Not a campaign, not a full reckoning with everything that needs to change in your relational life. 1 conversation this week with 1 person in which you say something true that you have not said before, not confrontational, not a grievance being aired, simply something true. A need you have not named, a feeling you have been carrying alone, a desire you have been suppressing because expressing it felt too risky or too revealing of a version of yourself you were not sure would be received. The reason this practice matters specifically now is that you are slightly more available to honesty than you normally are. The usual defenses are slightly lowered. The cost of the performance is slightly more visible than it usually is. This is a brief window. The low-tide conditions do not last indefinitely. Using this specific moment to practice being more fully seen by another person is one of the most direct ways to honor what these days are offering. The person does not need to be at the center of your most significant unresolved truth. It can be anyone you trust. The subject matter matters less than the practice of showing up more fully and discovering, as you will almost certainly, that being seen does not destroy the relationship. That it is, in fact, what the relationship was waiting for. You stayed. 40 minutes or close to it inside your own experience, inside the 6 specific truths that these days are carrying, inside the particular work of being a person in the middle of a real and unglamorous change. That is not nothing. For many people who are more comfortable giving their sustained attention to others than to themselves, 40 minutes of this kind of inward presence is the most unusual thing they have done all week. The low tide is still low. The floor of the sea is still exposed. You are still standing in the clarity of the aftermath, with what is true about your life more visible than it was on March 12th. That visibility is a gift, even when it does not feel like one. Even when the clarity feels like the opposite of comfort. The person you are in this moment, stripped of some of the props, more honest than is entirely comfortable, beginning to sense which way is north. That person is closer to the actual truth of you than the one who was maintaining everything that needed maintaining before the eclipse moved through. You have carried a great deal for a long time, much of it necessary, much of it chosen out of genuine love. And some of it has been carried past the point where it was serving you, maintained out of inertia and loyalty, to a version of yourself that is in the process of being honestly updated. Leave a comment before you go. Type these words: I am ready to see clearly. Not because you have all the answers, but because you have just spent 40 minutes choosing to look directly at what is true. And that choice, repeated, is how lives actually change. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of small, honest decisions to not look away. You are standing in the particular light of the morning after. The eclipse has moved through. The floor of your life is visible in a way it has not been in some time. Walk slowly on that floor. Look at what is there without rushing to cover it back over. The tide will come back in. It always does. But what you see and what you choose to do with what you see in this specific window of days, that is yours. That is the gift these days are carrying. Not easy, not dramatic, true.